Black Rook Hold is an iconic Demon Hunter dungeon returning from Legion for Season 3 Mythic Plus. This guide will give you everything you need to know to smash the dungeon from week 1. These guides are quick and efficient guides, so we're assuming you know not to stand in stuff and use dispels, etc. Instead, we will only be covering the key mechanics which you need to understand to time the dungeon. At the start of the dungeon, you can either go left or right to get to the first boss. There is a series of mobs with a different mini-boss along each path. Firstly, we have the Ghostly Protectors. These do a Sacrifice Soul cast, which increases the damage taken by 200%, whilst reducing the damage taken of all of the mobs by 75. They will only cast this approximately 30 seconds after you've engaged the pack, so try to always make sure you kill this mob off first to stop this cast from happening. If you go left, you'll have a mini-boss called Lord Etheldred Ravencrest, who has an ability from the first boss, Soul Echoes. This will leave behind purple swirlies wherever you are standing that will fear you after a few seconds if you get caught by them, so just keep moving to dodge them. If you go to the right, instead you will meet Lady Valandris Ravencrest, which has an unavoidable ability called Glaive Toss. This will target a player doing damage and also bounce to anyone nearby. Absolutely make sure you are not stacking up for this, as it hurts. Now on to our first boss of the dungeon, the Amalgam of Souls. Firstly, you must watch out if you're targeted by Swirling Scythe. This ability leaves a scythe behind on the floor which damages and knocks back players in 8 yards, doing a lot of damage. It can be exceptionally hard to see this scythe and it lasts a while, so make sure you're careful here whenever it's being cast. Next up we have Soul Echoes. This is the same as the mini boss ability that we mentioned before. Simply dodge the purple swirlies and make sure you aren't standing still. Next we have a large frontal called Reap Soul, just make sure you're dodging this, and finally whenever the boss reaches 50% HP, they will cast Call Souls. This causes 7 souls to spawn around the room which slowly walk towards the boss. If ever an ad reaches the boss, it will gain a stack of Soul Gorge. This increases the damage done of Soul Burst, which is a massive AoE that is cast approximately 30 seconds after this phase has initiated. This essentially means if you let any ads reach the boss, it will likely cause wipe. You ideally want to kill the ads off as soon as possible and use roots, stuns, slows and knockbacks here to help you slow the ads down. That's it for this boss though, onto our next set of trash. Firstly, you will encounter some spiders on these stairs which deal massive tank damage through a stacking dot from their auto attacks. You want to use stuns and other CC here to help out your tanks, and healers make sure you're dispelling whenever the stacks get high. Next we have Risen Archers, which are an incredibly annoying mob because they jump away and cast Arrow Barrage. This is a frontal cone which does a lot of damage, and you either want to sidestep it or stop the cast with stuns or CC. We then have Risen Scouts. These mobs do an uninterruptible cast called a Knife Dance, which really hurts. You need to make sure that you're stopping this cast with stuns or CC again. And in this area we also have Risen Companions, which are some cats which leap to players and leave behind a very nasty dot on all players within 10 yards. The AoE radius and damage from these mobs is huge, so make sure that you spread out whenever you see these cats. Now on to our second boss, Elisana Ravencrest. This is a 2-phase fight. In phase 1, random players will get Brutal Glaive. This deals single target damage, so use a defensive to help out your healers. Next we have Dark Rush, and this will target 3 non-tank players, and after a short while the boss will charge each of the targeted players, dealing damage and leaving behind a blazing trail. The trail left behind obviously does damage and can take up a large amount of space in the room if you don't stack up appropriately. Once Elisana reaches full energy, the second phase will initiate. The boss jumps up into the center of the room, but it's important to know that the boss is still targetable and can still be damaged. 2 ads will then spawn in this phase, 1 Vanguard that just does a frontal and an Arcanist that spam casts Arcane Blist at random players. Try and interrupt this whenever you can. Tanks, you want to group the ads up and move them to boss as fast as possible so you can cleave the boss down whilst killing off the ads. Elisana will also target random players with a cast called Eye Beam. This chases players around and leaves behind Fellblaze Ground again, which deals a lot of damage and can take up space, so also make sure that you're trying to run the I-Beam over to the edges of the room, or ideally run it on top of the previous casts to save space. This phase will end after 4 I-Beam casts and the boss runs out of energy. Then you'll be back in phase 1 and all you need to do is rinse and repeat. After this boss you'll head up a spiral staircase with boulders coming down that will one-shot you if you make contact. Obviously you need to dodge these, but my best advice is just to take your time and take it slow. You really don't want to die here and have to run back, so just take it slowly and you'll be fine. At the top of this first set of stairs we have Worm Tongue Scavengers that you want to watch out for. These mobs are incredibly unpredictable as they drink a potion with various potential effects. If you have enough AoE stops and CC, you can potentially stop this cast from going off, but most of the time they're probably going to go through. Indigestion will cause the mob to spew fire in a cone in front of them, dealing lots of damage. Hyperactive will cause the mob to spin around, again doing massive AoE damage and knocking players back. You just need to make sure that you don't walk anywhere near these mobs. And finally we have Frenzied, which causes the mob to increase in size and do more damage for each second it's in combat until it is killed. We also have Fellhounds in the area which do a drain life cast, make sure you kick this. We then also have Blade Lords which do an assault cast which deals large damage to tanks and can be stopped with stuns or CC. After this we come up to another spiral staircase with more boulders. As before, just take your time here and you'll be fine. At the top of the staircase, a gauntlet will start when you engage the first Fellspite Dominator. These mobs have two important casts to watch out for. First we have Fell Frenzy. This will increase the damage of all nearby mobs by 50% HP. This is an interruptible cast and you should absolutely kick it as much as possible. It's particularly deadly when it gets paired with our second cast, Sick Bats. This is an uninterruptible cast which causes nearby bats to focus a random non-tank player. If you are fixated by these bats, you either need to kite them as fast as possible or use stuns and knockbacks and other CC to kite them away. Bats will be constantly spawning in, so you need to focus on killing the Dominators off to finish the gauntlet. Now we're on to our third boss of this instance, Smashbite. Main mechanic of this fight is Hateful Gaze. This will target a random player and the boss will charge towards them, dealing damage to the first player hit. The ability will also leave behind a debuff that massively increases the damage done of the next gaze. You absolutely can be targeted by this ability twice in a row, in which case another party member needs to stand in front of you to soak the charge. If you accidentally take 2 charges in a row or a charge whilst you have the debuff, you will be taking fatal damage, so make sure that you're always rotating whoever soaks the charge. Next, the boss will be casting Earth-Shaking Stomp. This causes AoE damage and also knocks back all party members. This is a good time to use your defensives. And finally for this boss, every so often the boss will get a nearby Fellbat to target a random player with Fell Vomit. You want to try and aim this line so it takes up as little space as possible to keep space for the remainder of the encounter. That's it for abilities on this boss though, just make sure you're rotating the soaks and you should be good. Before our last boss, there is only one other mob that I want to mention, and that is the Risen Lancers. They cause this brown swirly to appear, and normally I don't mention swirlies that you need to dodge, but this cast in particular is worth mentioning because it is incredibly fast. That means you need to react very quickly or else you'll take huge damage and be stunned and most likely die. Now on to our final boss of this instance, Lord Kurtalos. This is a 2-phase encounter, and in the first phase the boss casts something called Whirling Blades at a random player. The blade is a boomerang effect which does a lot of damage, so make sure you don't get hit by it. Another boss on the side of the room, Latosius, will cast Dark Blast, which is a large swirly through the center. This will cause lethal damage, so make sure you're trying to watch out for it. When Lord Kurtalos reaches 20% HP, Latosius will join the fight in his true form as a Dreadlord. Dantalionox has a huge amount of health, and after a short while players will receive a buff to even out the fight. The buff increases damage, healing done and health by 300%, so make sure to save cooldowns for after you've received the buff. The boss will be casting Shadowbolt Volley, and it's important to note that the first cast of Shadowbolt Volley is before you receive the massive HP increase, so will do huge damage. You need to make sure that you use a defensive for this first volley, as it will likely kill you if you don't. Next, the boss will be casting Cloud of Hypnosis. This is a small, slow-moving cloud of gas which if you walk into will put you to sleep. The sleep can be dispelled at worst, but honestly just try and avoid the cloud in the first place. Shortly after transforming and periodically after that, Dreadlord's Guile will be cast, which causes 12 swirlies to spawn across the center of the room. As before with these large swirlies, it will be dealing lethal damage and it rotates very quickly, so make sure you're moving in the right direction. Finally, the Dreadlord will also be casting Stinging Swarm at random players. This causes ticking damage, and each time that it deals damage, it has a chance to stun players for 0.5 seconds. The swarm can be targeted, and you need to kill the swarm off as soon as possible to stop the swarm before the Guile cast starts. Being randomly stunned whilst running away will probably get you killed. That's it for this dungeon though. I wish you all the luck of the world for your Season 3 Mythic Plus journeys. I will be releasing advanced guides later in the season for those of you that push, so if you're interested, please consider subscribing. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons. The consistent income from my Patreon, even though only a little right now, really does mean a lot. So again, a big thank you. I really appreciate everyone. If you'd also like to potentially support me beyond a thumbs up and a subscribe, you can head on over there to check out what I offer in return. And finally, if you've enjoyed this guide, hopefully we will see you in the next one. Peace.